Just jump into it? Okay, got it.
I just jump in it. All right. So, what I found super interesting, Andrew, is do you know about the Mithraic cult, the cult of Mithras?
Is that is that from Crete?
No. Yes and
Are
no.
are they the ones that they have castration as part of their culture? They have where they
No.
castrate all the men? No.
No. No. No. The cult of Mithras, and so it has only barely something to do with Mithra, the iron, the god of Irania.
Hmm.
But it is like actually it developed in the first, second century AD, right? And it was for some time a direct rival to the upcoming Christianity, right?
Right. Yes.
And so it was
I
like
remember.
by now they have like found over 1,000 temples in all of Europe, Northern Europe, and the Mediterranean area. You know, the subterranean kind of temples with a depiction of Mithras kind of slaying the bull, right? And kind of the church and the Christianity kind of won the fight on dominance
Right.
on.
Right. They were very militaristic, right? They were sort of the Roman. They were kind of a Roman religion too, like in the Roman Empire. The
No,
Mithras
no, they were all
were the
around Europe.
military. They're all around Europe. Yeah. Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
but the reason why the Christianity was kind of prevailing, because it had its infrastructure. So you have to imagine the Roman Empire is kind of crumbling. But I've read this in a book about the popes, and so they wanted to transfer the power of the Caesars to the Pope so they can maintain absolute authority in worldly manners and spiritual
Hmm.
manners. And so you had all the differentiation in different states and whatnot, but the power was still with the Pope and with Rome, let's say. But so the infrastructure was still there, and the Mithraistic cult kind of vanished. And I like the description that I've read. It vanished into our subconscious, right? Because it was like
Oh.
it was a complete cult and religion in a kind of way that was in the first, second century AD, it was competing about dominance. And so the idea is that, there's like all these catacombs that are built underneath and these temples, they're all the same set and setting. You have the depiction of Mithras slaying the bull. And so the idea is that these are kind of star constellations, right? So you have in these depictions the zodiac, right? And
Yeah.
you have the image of the Taurus, of the bull, and then you have Mithras, which is a depiction of the star constellation of Perseus, the hero, and that's the idea that shifts the whole cosmos in direction of the age of the Aquarius. So that was the main idea here, right? And so
Hmm.
and so you have like different ideas. So you have like underground temples, you have astronomical kind of practices, and then you had like this weird rituals, which were happening in these temples.
What kind of
And
rituals?
huh?
What kind of rituals did they
Yeah, the
practice?
Aloysian rituals, and so it was at that time punishable by death if you would disclose the content of these rituals to profane bystanders, let's say, right?
Mm.
And so, but there are still like old documents and papyri that kind of describe what was going on in there. And so, to understand what's going on there, they had like this conception that the soul after death was traveling through different spheres in order
Hmm.
to reach the fixed stars, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
The fixed stars. Um, and so, but this journey of the soul was considered very dangerous, right? To go
Hmm.
through these spheres. And what they did in these rituals were like they were giving the initiates kind of secret magic words that would ease the transition and facilitate the transition between these spheres to reach the soul's final destination, right?
Interesting. Mm.
What's interesting now is, okay, you put all of this together. You have basically an occult religion that works with astrology, secret magic words, and with the kind of idea that you need magic words to grow, to go beyond yourself, to reach the next stage. So what does it remind you of?
Well, of course, in in the Vajrayana tradition and the Eastern tradition, you have mantras, which are seed syllables, and often they don't have a literal meaning, but they have a kind of a psychological. They induce a certain state, you could say.
Right.
So if you have, for example, hung, right? It's hung, part of, you would say this, and it has the ability to cut off your conceptual mind and give you a penetrating glimpse of reality or something like that. And then you would have other mantras which would create a state of compassion, other mantras which would create a state of intellectual clarity, other mantras that would link you to certain energetic modes of being, and even just so these kind of Sanskrit syllables are often, they don't have any representative literal meaning, like you say kiki or something when you get to the top of a mountain, which means nothing, but it just means, it's just like an explanation, or ema ho, which is an explanation of like great bliss and happiness, or it doesn't mean anything. So I don't think we have a hard time accessing, let's say, the subtle psychological, or what they would call the subtle body in this world. So in the modern world, because we're so fully, kind of literal about things. So I guess those traditions. I mean, I know in the Jewish tradition, definitely the words, like I think, the four syllables are the four worlds, is the name of God and things like that. So there's always been this tradition there. It's just somewhat hidden and somewhat lost and somewhat,
That's what I mean. And so the idea that I'm alluding to is that you had the official kind of religion that permeated with the centuries, that permeated all of Europe, right? Mm-hmm. But then you had like the unconscious kind of thing that was like suppressed with all these kind of weird rituals and passwords and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And of course, that was the base of all the alchemical and Western esotericism of occult traditions that kind of draw from exactly these kinds of materials, because they're based on the phallic perseus. It's not something, because you have to see that the Christian idea was like everything is happening through love and through grace. Transformation is happening by the grace of God, right? Yeah. But the Mithraic idea was, no, you do it yourself. That is like the active. It's a hero's journey. It's the basic idea of you can transform yourself. That's the basic idea of alchemism, of the occult traditions. And so I found the lineage, coming from Mithraism, like into alchemy, into the occult traditions, like in the 20th century. I found that very interesting, that they drew from the same kind of modus operandi and the same material, let's say, because you can't really think, because the Catholic Church doesn't really work with zodiac, right? And all these planet constellations, it doesn't. But the Mithraic religion does, and also the occult kind of traditions.
Well, you said that it's phallic, and it's interesting. I want, maybe we have to think through that, because yes, the Mithric tradition was probably more heroic, masculine, phallic. At the same time, it seems that what the Christian religion does is sort of, it denies the fierce aspect of the feminine.
Yeah.
As well. So and sort of privileges masculine logos, the word.
Right.
So I'm wondering about that, like, because often the West is sort of considered phallocentric, as in other words, word oriented, just like, okay, and masculine, and like, and trying to sort of and witch burning, and being this intense fear of the feminine.
Yeah.
And in the Protestant tradition, sort of stripping the church of all of its all of its esoteric qualities. And I think the esoteric qualities are very bound up in the feminine. And then if you see in the Hermetic tradition, the sophiology or the feminine aspects are often much more magical and let's say, or much more magical and the hidden and so I'm wondering about that.
Yeah.
I'm wondering. So Mithric, although it seems like a very powerful, let's say, heroic, killing the bull, very masculine in that sense. But I imagine also there's a fierce feminine quality, or matriarchal quality to the old religions.
Yeah.
I mentioned the castration because I was reading in Eric Neumann about how in I guess pre-Mithraic culture in Crete. I know there's bull. I went to when I was in Crete. I went and saw these old, this old Colosseum where there were bulls. It was a different kind of bullfighting than they have in Spain. They actually didn't kill the bull; they tamed it. But anyway, but before that, there were castration cults. Where actually they would perform matriarchal castration cults in pre-religious societies. So anyway,
wow, okay.
I'm wondering about the feminine as well, like you were talking about the phallic and
yes, I think it's a question on which scale you you look at, because if you was it Augustinus who said, the big three, it's my words, it's not exactly a quote, but the big three Christian practices are love, hope, and faith, right? Something like this. And they're all kind of passive in that sense that they hope.
Well, they're other oriented, right?
Yeah. Whereas, there's no, the flip side would be the will, but there's no codification of will. It's like, no, you can't will emergence to happen. You can't will the will of God. You can't fall in love on purpose. That's the idea, right? It's like it's something that happens to you when you fall in love. That happens when you're enlightened. It's something that happens to you by the grace of God. And so it's all
that's
about
the feminine aspect.
Yeah.
But maybe by repressing the feminine aspect suddenly becomes the unconscious. In other words, all dominating.
Yeah.
It reminds me of somebody was talking about Mount Athos, right? And Mount Athos is all men, except the mountain is supposed to be feminine, right?
I don't know that one. What's that about?
Mount Athos, right? It's where it's the center of Orthodox Christianity, and it's a mountain in Greece. And there's since it was founded, there's never been a woman that has set foot on that mountain, and it's full of old monasteries. It's an incredibly powerful spiritual place, but women are not allowed to go there.
Oh wow, okay.
So they were saying there's no women allowed in Mount Athos except for the mountain, which is feminine.
Okay.
In other words, well, I was like in men's work, for example, when you get a lot of men's together, they develop feminine qualities because there's no women in the room. So they learn how to, being caring and intuitive and motherly with each other, right?
Right.
If you get a lot of women together, like Catholic nuns, they're extremely masculine and aggressive, and they grow beards, and they need to develop the masculine quality in them because they're separated from men. So my sort of speculation, it's just a speculative idea, is that Christianity it's the Father, Son, the Holy Ghost. So those are entirely masculine principles.
Yeah.
And there's lacking the Sophia is driven underground, the feminine.
Yeah.
So because those Sophia is driven underground, it becomes the entire structure. Like the feminine is the church, it's the mother, it's the so the whole structure is about caring and about compassion and about unconditional love and all of those maternal qualities.
Yeah.
And so it's about killing the masculine bull or the fierce masculine energy. So that's why Catholicism is so intensely feminine.
But that metaphor didn't fit because you mentioned killing the bull. That's the Mithraic kind of way.
No, I know,
of,
but I see the Catholic religion. But you also see what's his name, the archangel, and he's killing the dragon.
right.
Saint Michael. There is that
Yeah.
metaphor, right? That
Yeah.
continues into the Catholic Church. However, the primary figures are the crucified man, Mary, the mother, and the child.
Yeah.
Not the warrior anymore, not the right.
Yeah. It's so interesting, really, because, if you think about, indifference and non-attachment as spiritual goals, or,
Mm-hmm.
it's like I was reading this thing. It's like it's like an anecdote. So there's like this sociologist, I think his name was Waller or something, and he looked at romantic relationships, right? And so he looked at the power dynamic, and he had like this whole idea that the person with least emotional attachment or interest is the one who's most powerful in the relation, right? And so it's like it's a folk wisdom, basically, which says that, the one who is least attached can make more demands in the relationship. It's obvious, right? And so the most interested has to comply to these demands because the person is attached. And so but it's obviously not just about power, it's also about freedom. If you're not attached, you have way more possibilities and way more stuff. And so it's in a way about attachment. And then at the same day when I read this, I was talking to another friend of mine who was who was in the Fintorn Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, I've been there,
yeah, when he was young. And the first day he went there, the organizer or manager took him aside and said, okay, if you look at this, the people do best work here, their best work, and do the most impact when they don't need the Fintorn Foundation. And she meant by that, if they don't need Fintorn to resolve their personal traumas and issues, right? So if they are somewhat detached from the whole endeavor, and so you have like the same thing, you have like the detachment indifference kind of thing. If you're not attached through your personal traumas to the work you're doing. And so this is, of course, the same idea in spiritual traditions. All traditions tell you don't be attached, because through attachment comes pain and suffering, right?
yeah.
And I think all these things are not different ideas, it's the same idea, right? It's the idea of non-attachment and freedom and this interplay between masculine and feminine qualities.
Well, interestingly enough, in tantric tradition, it's about attachment, not non-attachment. Like the sutra is about becoming detached from the passions.
Right.
And I would say that the tantric tradition is about having strong attachments and being able to handle it. In other words, not having these attachments destroy you, but being able to handle the energy of the attachment. So instead of trying to kill the dragon, you ride the dragon or something like that, or trying to kill the tiger, you learn how to. I mean, it's a cheesy sort of metaphor, but you get the idea. First, you have there's killing the dragon, killing the and then there's the idea of being able to use the passionate energies, of intense attachment.
I don't think we're talking about different things here, because detachment doesn't mean you kill it. It means that you can actually ride it in a sense, because you're not attached to it. You're not bound to it. You can operate freely with these kinds of energies and drives if you want.
Well, maybe it's a psychological attachment that you don't have anymore, but you still have the passion, something like that. I see what you mean.
Yeah.
I see what you mean, but that often leads this religious idea of non-attachment often leads to what they would call in Buddhism attachment to emptiness, which is even worse than attachment than strong attachment to a partner.
Yeah, but isn't the second tenet of Buddhism that all suffering stems from attachment?
Yeah, this is the sutric aspect of Buddhism, right? Not the tantric aspect of Buddhism. Everything changes.
Right.
So in the
But
sutric aspect of sutric aspect is overcoming your attachments and desires and going beyond them, and going beyond them. Whereas in the tantric tradition, it's become it's almost the opposite. Although you have to have this basis, right, of being able to, this disciplined basis of being able to be non-attached, but you're fully. It's about, it's like you take the poison rather than you try to become pure. You use the poison as transformation.
right.
Anyway,
I get that.
I see what you're saying. It's like at one point they become sort of the same, but again, there's a tendency with non-attachment of dissociation. Whereas I think in the tantric traditions, it's total association, and
Yeah, I think, to put it more bluntly, and I was thinking about this. I think it's a provocative thing to say, but I think you shouldn't engage in spirituality and any form of spiritual or religious or tantric practices, so long as you are psychologically traumatized through childhood traumas or whatever, because you're still attached. Then you are attached to spirituality, and you will go nowhere.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
If you're defining attachment as trauma, I see what you mean, but
no,
I think there's another kind of positive attachment. Like there's codependent attachment, and that's negative on a psychological level. And then there's what they call in psychology, like positive, like I don't know, positive attachment. What's the word in psychology when you don't have this. See, when you don't have this fearful attachment, when you have a positive kind of attachment with your wife or your partner, or it's a different kind of attachment than this terrified attachment you have in a very strong erotic relationship where the other person is going to leave you, or you're completely swallowed up by the thing. Whereas the next kind of attachment is a positive kind of attachment, where you have a certain kind of trust at the same time you're attached. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but no, I'm not talking about this. I'm talking about the urge of our spiritual scene nowadays to solve childhood issues through spirituality.
Agreed.
And so that's an issue, because then you are trauma. It's not, attachment is not trauma, but you are kind of attached to your ego because it's still bleeding, and to use that metaphor.
Yeah.
And you can't really engage in sublime spiritual practices when you still have childhood trauma, or like any kind of personal trauma. And so you should first do therapy, and then if you're still interested, then you could go into spirituality, because then you're kind of free, and then you can go into these kinds of conscious agreements that you're talking about, and conscious attachments but then you are still able to resolve them and detach if it's necessary. You're not bound to them because of trauma. That's
I get that. I agree. Well, there's a way in which I agree, a way in which I don't agree. I don't think that you can ever resolve your psychological issues. So I don't think there's a point where, okay, now I'm ready for spiritual practice because I've become completely untraumatized. I think there's a way in which the human condition is, a birth trauma. What did he call it? Stan Grof. The human condition is traumatic in itself. So you can't, and spirituality or religious practice or whatever, meditation, all these things are there to address the trauma. But I think in a way, the birth trauma, the deepest trauma, let's say the trauma of duality, or whatever, the trauma of primordial suffering. But on the other hand, you can have all these childish sorts of traumas which make you not able to behave like an adult, and you can bring that into the spiritual realm, and that just creates toxicity.
Exactly. If you act like a mama's boy,
yeah.
If you think spirituality is there to resolve your issues, instead that you have like a mature outset where you know about your trauma, you know how to deal with them in a mature way, to have at least to a certain extent healed them, but you have like a mature thing. You don't, because like as a publisher, I'm always confronted with these mama boys that are like, oh no, what can you do for me? Right? It's like as if spirituality is owning them something, or
Yeah.
if the world is owning, but that's not a mature approach. And you could see, oh no, they're Keegan says when the trauma has you, when the
Yeah.
feeling has you, instead of you have the feeling and you own the trauma. It's a completely different approach.
Yeah. Or the neurosis, you could say, like
Yeah, neurosis, and that's what I'm talking about, right? So you have to own these things, and then you can engage with spirituality if you still want to. But again, it's like this idea of, because we were talking about the masculine and the feminine, if we talk about this interplay between owning something, be owned, to be indifferent, to engage, I like this free interplay between masculine and feminine kind of energies.
Yes, and I think the detachment you're talking about is masculine in the sense that you're not so you're not overwhelmed by the situation, whereas
Right.
the feminine energy is sort of an overwhelming. It's like the malchut, or the fire that overwhelms you, right? It's this overwhelming thing, and then the masculine is the container that steps back and can hold that,
right?
And on some level, right? Like you see that in the Yab Jung. I have a Yab Jung picture behind me. It's the masculine is like straight and standing straight and embracing this dynamic feminine that's in this.
Yeah.
So I think when spirituality gets too hyper masculine, then it becomes very detached and remote and cold and a conceptual, and it becomes kind of dead.
Right.
Whereas if it becomes too feminine, it becomes all this touchy feely huggy stuff that is just cringeworthy, because it doesn't have a way to, doesn't have that let's say masculine force container.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think on that level, that's interesting, going back to Christianity versus Mithraism, because again, you said Christianity and also the New Age culture, it's all about embrace and compassion and love and all these things. But the Mithraist cult were about Perseus. That was the active and masculine engagement with the world and with the way of the soul, let's say. And so that is like, it was different. It was not about sitting in a church and receiving the sacrament or whatever, or your weekly sermon. But it was, okay, so what can we actually do? Like, what are the secrets of navigating in this world in a proper way? And that's interesting to me, how it was like, how this polarity like kind of played out in this different cults and religions.
But on the other hand, Christianity, what it did was it revealed the scapegoat mechanism in a way that is inherent in these primitive religions. That whereas, of course. So that was, I think that was a necessary stage or something. I think Christianity did, in some respects, help people out of a kind of a dark age, where there were things like castration cults and, very intense, very human sacrifice and very intense sort of. It moved the civilization forward in that sense. Right. Although it did create its own kind of dark age, right? Which was when it reverted back to its own, like when it was unconscious of that. Well, I was reading, and Dion Fortune was talking about how Gevura, the dark side of God, is like denied in Christian religion. That is the need for aggression, the need for violence at times to protect. All of those sort of qualities which we find so reprehensible, and yet because we find it's so reprehensible to do that, to engage in this sort of necessary kind of violence, we end up repressing that, and we end up creating atom bombs and things like that.
Yeah,
right? We create violence into technology and into the underground, so we don't have to. We're not going out and and killing the bull anymore. It's happening all on the psychological level. Because we don't acknowledge Gavora,
Yeah.
we only want the beauty side. I can't remember what it's called. Maybe Chesed, or it's on the right hand side. Is the it's about love and beauty and redeeming the world. Spirit and love and beauty redeeming the world, and then the other side is protection. Necessarily violence. Christ, difficult. Facing the difficult challenges, like going in and fighting the dragon, all that sort of thing is on the hand of Gavora, and we don't acknowledge that, and therefore we create unconscious violence.
Right. I'm
In a way,
reading the Brother Karamazov right now. Have you ever read that one?
Yeah, sure, of course, yeah.
It's amazing because it's like this. I'm just starting out. I'm like page 150 or whatever. It's like this, existential dialogue about the pitfalls of Christianity. At least where I am now at that book, right?
Yeah.
And so Ivan and Alyosha, they have like all these discussions about about. I mean, it was written in the downfall of Christianity in Russia, basically. And it's so interesting because one of the points of critique is like you could be the most horrendous criminal and do the most abhorrent acts of violence or whatever if you just beg for forgiveness and God and confess, then God's grace will alleviate you and heighten you and free you and so, but that's such a weird notion if you think about it. It's just like, the act of confession itself relieves you of your of the punishment of your soul. But this is exactly what you said, because it is like there's no active integration of. Because if you actually can integrate Gevura, that's what I say, you wouldn't even need to do those acts, and you wouldn't even need the grace of God to embrace you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, maybe is it like it's like what Jordan Peterson says about how, like, you have to realize that you're capable of these evil acts, that you yourself, have a satanic quality to you, right? You can do it, rather than try to project that outward at escape.
Right.
So when you realize that you are the concentration camp guard, or
exactly, and then you can act in a moral way, but then you don't need to do these reprehensible acts, and you don't need the grace of God.
Yeah. Well, I mean, sometimes you do need the grace of God, though, because that's when you're in this conundrum and you can't act, like you're stuck. And you don't know how to redeem yourself because the pattern that you're engaged in is so intense that there has to be something from the outside to come in and break that patterning. So I think that's kind of like what the virtue of confession would be. Although I see what you're the negative aspect you described. I think probably the negative aspect of confession. It's like a get out of jail free card. And that never works, because you have to go through the karmic consequences of your act, right? You always have to face up to something. There's always a consequence. There's always a rippling consequence to whatever you do. So you can't get out of it. But maybe your perception can be changed. Even you can go through it. Like in Crime and Punishment, the guy went to the Siberian prison, but something changed inside of himself. Like he had an internal change.
Right.
So he did go to the prison, and he accepted his condition and his punishment, and that was his sort of redemption, rather than there. And the circumstantial changed slightly, like the girl came up with him, and I don't know if you remember Crime and Punishment, but sure. I remember there's this very intense, like, he's in denial the whole time of what he's doing, and then at the moment he understands it. and he confesses, then everything kind of changes. And even though the consequences of his action continue to be the same, he's had an internal sort of change of heart.
I know what you're saying. I'm still referring to the hero Perseus, because the Perseus still can bend his knee, you know, at the right moment, like Aragorn did in Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
But it doesn't. But it's not his overall modus operandi. It's like, you know, it's like, because Raskolnikov is a very disturbed character. You know, he's not a hero in this sense of the word. Raskolnikov is a mirror image, you know, an inversion of the hero, because he's the victim of his own thoughts. The victim.
Well, maybe he's one of the first anti-heroes. Yeah.
Huh? No, yeah, but yeah, exactly. But the point I'm trying to make here is that, and we talked about this in previous episodes. It's like we're not a heroic culture, because Raskolnikov is not a hero; it's an inversion. And so, of course, the true hero can bend his knee and needs the eagles to fly in, like in Lord of the Rings. Let's stay with this metaphor, you know, or like Frodo putting the ring into the Mordor or whatever. But our culture is not set up like this, and that's why these myths speak to us, because we're not like this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're capable of certain heroic acts in our individual lives. I mean, but isn't that the whole thing of modernity? Hamlet says to be or not to be, and he cannot act. He's paralyzed about acting, and he can't take the heroic path because it doesn't make sense to him, and he's decided the world is sort of absurd in the Kafkaesque sense, and he's caught in a labyrinth and all that kind of thing. Of course. That is modernity. Is the loss. Modernity itself is the loss of heroicism.
Yeah, exactly.
And
exactly.
And then postmodernity is just an analysis of that, right? You know,
exactly.
Going deeper, just saying, okay, there are no grand narratives. There is no hero anymore. It's all a construction. It's all a fabrication. It's all a lie.
Yeah, but
that has its truth as well.
Like the mimetic groundwork for exactly this was laid down in the second century AD, where kind of we collectively agreed that the more Christian way, you know, the more passive way, you know, that kind of feeds into the whole victimology, you know, Christ as the guy who is the eternal scapegoat, who is the victim, instead of, on the other side, Perseus, the one who actually transforms the world, which was Perseus and Mithraism. They transform, they shift the whole cosmos. That's a whole different paradigm, right? You're not convinced,
or at least, well, the Christian myth, it transforms the world through acknowledging the heroicism is that acknowledging that the external enemy is you. So there's this big responsibility that comes with that. You know, you become instead of projecting out, looking for an outward enemy and going to fight it in this, you know, in the mythological way, right? You step into the scapegoat position yourself, and that's how you redeem the world. So there's something profound about that, I think.
No, there's definitely something profound about this.
But I guess maybe when we move into modernity, the interesting thing is a sort of a reversal. Like, okay, the scapegoat, you know, becomes the desirable model, and that's when we're in trouble, right? Or we want to become the most, we want to become, you know, the more marginal and outsider and you know we are, the more heroic we're supposed to be.
Yeah.
Whereas that's not necessarily the case. I mean, you could be heroic and marginal, but you could also be heroic in the center. And
I was reading Schopenhauer, and he said something about relationships, but also about our ways of how attraction works, right? And so that was like way before Freud and Lacan, and so if you actually read it, so Schopenhauer influenced not only Nietzsche, but you find very much a lot of concepts from Schopenhauer and Freud and Lacan.
Mm-hmm.
And so he says something like, and that was in the 18th century, that we are always attracted to that alleviates our own defects, let's say, our misgivings. And so we're looking when we're looking for a romantic partner, we're looking for something that they have that complete us in a kind of way, because we're not having it, right? Yeah. So
attraction is based on a lack.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think our attraction to the hero myth of Perseus, the monomyth of Campbell, and all these hero movies that you see, that it's because we are not like this.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
So we're not like, because Jesus, for all the initiation that is transmitted through his story, he's not the hero that shines at the end of the adventure, because he's dead.
Yeah.
And the main image is of him being tortured to death. That's not like the hero myth of Perseus. It's a different thing. And so I think we're attracted to the hero myth because our culture is not set up.
Well, in a way, they're both wrong, right? I mean,
they're both incomplete. Yeah.
Yeah. So the hero myth, where there's this glorious achievement, is a bit of a lie. Right? That's and then there's a glorious conquering of the world. And then also the fact that there's just death, that would be a lie as well. I'd say they're both kind of extremes. You could say it's I never thought about this before, but the extreme of nihilism versus the extreme of eternalism, right? So the extreme of nihilism is you just nailed to the cross and you die. Right. There's no, the Christian image. I never thought of this is, I guess, how Nietzsche attaches the Christian image to nihilism. It's like death. And then eternalism is like there's this glorious, conquering hero. Mm-hmm. But I think that like the more profound religious mythology have a next step. So like there's not just nihilism. There's the apophatic, the nothingness, and then there's the post-apophatic, whereas the nothingness and the somethingness come together, or the emptiness and luminosity come together. Or in the Christianity, you have the crucifixion and the resurrection, right? So there's not the literal resurrection, because it's kind of ridiculous, but sort of the resurrection of the spirit.
Yeah.
So there is a death and a resurrection. Or there is so like the extreme of eternalism is some eternal reward, hoping for some eternal reward. And the extreme of nihilism is just like there's this meat body that just like, goes through various tortures, gets nailed to a cross and dies, and that's everybody's experience.
I have another idea that alludes to what you're just saying. And it's a preposterous thought, because it's like just a play of ideas. And so imagine there's an inside and an outside, right? In our culture. So the inside is the Christian narrative and the Christian paradigm with all that is attached to it. And then there's the outside, the subconscious, the Mithraic occult kind of things. The more the
popular culture.
No. Yeah. But the inside and the outside. And so you have, and my thought was, okay, so maybe you can view this as a general architecture to lay as a pattern on psychologists and philosophers. And so you can say, oh no, sure, Nietzsche is way more outside and heroic and identifying with Perseus and the Superman. Then you have Hegel. You have he's inside. He's completely Christian. And then you have Schopenhauer. He's outside. You have Wilber and Leary that are outside. They're accessing the subconscious, the shamanic, the phallic in a kind of way. And it's like you have all this interplay between the inside philosophers, let's say, that are kind of the accessing, the paradigms of Christianity and the scapegoat, and then you have the outside thinkers.
Yeah, well, our friend Thomas Amarque, we were talking about this, and he talks about there's ritual time and there's profane time. Profane time is the time that we live in, in a like within the society, and we have to follow certain rules, and it's also like more like the exoteric aspect of going to church, and the Ten Commandments, and not sleeping with your neighbor's wife, and basically behavior, rules of behavior in society and how to act. It's interesting you call that the inside, because I would say that would be the outside. That would be the exoteric, whereas the esoteric would be ritual time, and ritual time would be like where you would be like the tantric or the sacred, or where you work with all these energies. Maybe you work with trying to tame the dragon or the bull, or or you work with sexuality, you work with magic, you work with all syllables and all the sort of inner tantras, or in the inner world, and that's more the artistic realm. So that's more. And in the West, we don't have a sutric tantric divide. We just have sutra. Christianity has just been sutric, right?
Right.
It's been fully. This was Thomas's theory. It's just been fully sutric. It's sort of collapsed tantra into itself, and because I guess the mass is a sort of left-hand tantric, because you're eating the blood, drinking the blood, and eating the body of Christ, which is about as radical in the sense, but you do it all virtually, right? So anyway, maybe Christianity is this sutric, the appropriate sutric religion for the society on some level, and then these other things that you were speaking about, like the outer thing, belongs more to the ritual time, or
I meant something
the realm of magic, or the realm of I know it. So I sort of see it. I see it inner and outer in the other way around, but in a way I get what you're saying. You were talking about the culture, basically, like the imagery of the culture, or the collective unconscious, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, like, just look at the duality between Hegel and Schopenhauer, right? So Hegel was inside, he was well known, he was, he was accepted, and he was like, even back then, he was like
man of the world.
Yeah, man of the world. And so, but Schopenhauer's critique is just like fashionable nonsense what he writes, and so you could see a lineage between Hegel and all these blasé postmodern philosophers who use like these kinds of empty word salad, exactly. But then you have like Schopenhauer, who is like on the outside, like accessing, Eastern spirituality, Western spirituality. He's like unhappy. He's not accepted, but in a way, accessing deep structures of our existence in a way that was so hugely influential for Nietzsche, for Freud, for all of these people, because he was the one who brought Eastern spirituality to the West. He was the one who invented the concept of the unconscious, right? He was the one who was like, oh no, like
Schopenhauer invented the language of the
unconscious. Spoke about this.
I didn't know that. No.
And so he was the one who was like, oh no, we are all driven by this insatiable will, and will is like the in itself of existence. And we all we can but we can never access is we can live it, and what we understand is representation, and this is like systems theory. And so it's like super, but he was also always in the outside, and so you have like Nietzsche was always in the outside. He was like critiquing the Western, the inside paradigm, and that's what I meant, Wittgenstein was outside, and it's like,
Yeah. And it's funny, I was thinking, maybe this is the reason why Hegel had to use this convoluted Kantian type of language, is because the only way that you could say something profound on the inside is if you make it as esoteric as possible,
Right.
because
Yeah.
because you have to hide the truth of it because the truth is too difficult to be accessed by, let's say, most people, or it's like the burning bush. You can't see the burning bush, the face of God directly, or you will die. So you can't deal with these difficult Schopenhauer Nietzschean truths on the inside. They're just not functional.
Yeah, because the
Like the
outside is
sacred,
the
but it
other.
is the same thing as I'm talking about, because the sacred is not functional in the marketplace, right?
Right.
It's
You
not
have to.
functional.
Nietzsche said you have to look into the abyss, but the abyss is the unconscious. That is the outside
Yeah.
by definition, right? And
Yeah,
so
the outside. Yeah, well, which is really the inside, or something like that, because the unconscious is usually, you would call that the inside. Like
now I got you. Now I got what
you
you're
see,
saying.
the
Yes,
unconscious is inside you. It's like deep. Below the surface. So that's
yes,
why I would say it was inside, not
yes,
outside. Whereas the
yes.
outside is the world, right?
Right. You're looking from the individual perspective. I'm looking now from the social perspective, but we're talking about the same thing.
From the social perspective, outside is yeah, the outside is the inside, and from the individual perspective, the inside is the inside. Yeah, I got
So
it.
it's interesting. Mhm.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
that's very good.
yeah, I think we're good now.
You think we're there? Yeah, yeah. Yeah. This is great. I can go on forever.